Good morning. Good morning. We normally wait a little bit later to start because students coming in from classes and stuff, and I understand there's one class that have some students that are going to be here. Really appreciate your attendance in the Black History Month program this year. It is very special for us because it's part of the Black History Month celebration commemorating the life of Booker T. Washington, a 2015 event. That event, of course, is all year long, and there are going to be many different phases to that event, and this is just one of them. And we're very fortunate to have one of our own speaking here today. I've known Robert Zabawa for several years, and he is the consummate researcher, and the information that he has swimming around in that brain is just amazing. A variety of subjects, and I really appreciate him coming here today and being with us. Of course, this event is sponsored by the Archives, the Department of English, Department of History and Political Science, College of Arts and Sciences, the Tuskegee University National Center for Bioethics and Research in Healthcare. I'm really thankful to have all of that support here for this event. Robert Zabawa is a research professor and coordinator of social science and rural development research. He's also the coordinator agricultural and natural resource economics program, the George Washington Carver Agricultural Experiment Station here on campus. As I said, he's a consummate researcher, and I really am looking forward to his presentation today. He is well educated, even if he did go to the University of Florida. That gives him, I guess, some credibility. But I do think that you're going to enjoy his presentation because I do know he knows this subject very well. So without further ado, we're going to welcome Robert Zabawa.
Thank you, Dana. Just to set the record straight, that University of Florida was after I got my PhD and I didn't have a job.
Oh, you did have a job.
So I went back to school. I was working on a master's when I got the call to come here in '85. So that's the only reason Florida's on that transcript. I was telling Ms. Middleton that I had another presentation that I gave earlier in the month on the founding of the PAW, Professional Ag Workers Conference. And I thought I could switch it with this one because that one I'm really, really interested in. I'm interested in this one too, of course. But then I remembered that we're focusing on Booker T. Washington, so he's a little bit further back in the area that we want to talk about. And just a little bit of background on this idea of Booker T. Washington and the founding of Cooperative Extension, in that what really got me interested in what I'll present today, and actually what I present today may not be the bulk of what I'm going to be saying, is a little nugget of information that I got reading. And this term came up, and it came up in several places, and the term is conference agent. And no one ever really explained what that was. They just said it was that this person was there, maybe a little bit about what they did, but that was it. And I thought, well, who is this or what is this? So I kept digging deeper and deeper, and I came up with some information about that, which really, I think, piqued my interest. And this position was created by Booker T. Washington, part of his genius of, I think, of creating things and getting out the way, letting good people do their stuff. So anyway, also, I won't speak for the full time, I don't think. I'm used to speaking for 10 minutes very quickly, in professional meetings. And then when someone says, oh, you get an hour, I said, oh my gosh, I couldn't listen to myself for an hour. And my wife said that too. Please don't do that to them. I said, okay. So just for that, I'll try not to do that. But at the same time, as I was saying earlier, if I like something, I really don't care what you think. I'll just keep going. So you can walk out when you want to. I won't take it personally. So okay, so we're going to look at
Just use the arrow key.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, this idea of Booker T. Washington and the founding of Cooperative Extension at Tuskegee. As a way of introduction, since 1914, last year was the centennial of the Smith-Lever Act that created the National Cooperative Extension Service, it's useful to look at what and who brought this act into creation. Or, as some have said, the Smith-Lever Act had a long gestation period. And to do this, we have to get some perspective, and that's why I want to go back to the Smith-Lever Act. Now, to get this perspective, and if you've heard me talk before, you may have seen this before, I always like to have background, or this idea of where we came from. And it must be 10 years ago now, I was on this road going to a friend's house, a country road, and I passed by this scene, and I thought, what is this scene? We could think of it like this, okay? You think you see something there, not quite sure what it was, and as I drove, I slowed down, and it came a little closer, and I kept driving. I thought, if this is what I think it is, I'm going to stop on the way back. And sure enough, I stopped on the way back, and it got a little clearer, and I pulled off to the side of the road, and I saw this man. And I said, wow, you don't see this very often anymore, right? And I broke it. And so I pulled off, and I just watched him for a little bit. And then I walked over, and I had my camera with me. And he stopped, and he looked up at me, and I said, would you mind if I take your picture? And he looked at me, and he had that expression in his face like, yeah, you could take my picture, but why don't you do something useful and get behind this plow? So, things are, you get a whole bunch of perspectives of what's going on. And I asked him, was this his land? And he said, no, but Mr. Jimmy let him do this for him. I said, good for you. But it was very interesting. So anyway, going back to the perspective is actually, if we want to talk about the beginning of extension, we have to know what official extension is. And if you go back to the original act of 1914, it says it's an act to provide the cooperative agricultural extension work between the agricultural college and the several states receiving the benefits of the act of Congress approved July in 1862. Now, if you go further, where the actual work is, Section 1 says, in order to aid in diffusing among the people of the United States useful and practical information on the subjects relating to agriculture and home economics, and to encourage the application of the same, there may be continued or inaugurated in connection with the college or colleges of each state. And it goes on to say those created in 1862 and 1890, later on, extension work shall be carried on in cooperation with the United States Department of Agriculture. So what Section 1 of the Act does is it sets up the partnership between the land-grant institutions, that is the 1862s and the 1890s, and the USDA. You're in trouble. All right. So then, that's important. So the partnership. Now, Section 2 goes on to say that cooperative agricultural extension work shall consist of the development of practical applications of research and knowledge and giving of instruction and practical demonstration of existing or improved practices. But key to it is to persons not attending the said colleges and imparting that information. So the idea is not only does this partnership between the colleges and USDA take place to create information, but it's going to be for people who don't attend the colleges. Okay? So Section 2 describes the work that will be conducted, in imparting this information. Therefore, when we're looking at the beginnings of cooperative extension, one has to look for these two agencies. That is, the educational agency, and then second, the knowledge dissemination agency. And so this is just an outline of what I want to do in terms of what Smith-Lever is doing in pulling in education. Now, the logical place to start in terms of examining the link between education and agriculture are the Morrill Act Institutions in 62 and 90. These pieces of legislation set up now what is the land-grant system. However, while the purpose of the Morrill Act was to teach such branches of learning as are related to agriculture and the mechanical arts in these institutions, it was soon found out that the targeted students were not prepared for this level of education. And then, if you remember, the 1890 institutions, many of them were considered high schools, and then brought up into college level. Now, in an effort to bridge the gap between elementary education and admission to college curriculum, a new school was created, that is the Congressional District Agricultural Schools. They were created mainly in the South. They started in Alabama in 1889 and were followed by Georgia and Virginia 17 years later, with Arkansas and Oklahoma developing a similar kind of school. These were named because they were placed within the congressional districts of each state. And they offered a 4-year curriculum that included liberal arts, sciences and agriculture, and home economics, to such a degree that they were often considered what we would think of as comprehensive high schools. So they were almost teaching the college stuff before the colleges were teaching. So what was happening is that students would go through their elementary education, then go into these congressional district schools, and then go to the land-grant schools. Now, in Alabama, there was a close tie between these congressional district schools and the 1862 land grant through a board of control, because the board of control consisted of the Commissioner of Agriculture, the director of the experiment station at API, which became Auburn, and 5 progressive farmers. The board of control was given the power to elect presidents, teachers, and directors, and to manage the schools and stations as they thought best. The first year, the state appropriated $3,000 to each school, and for every year thereafter, $2,500 payments were made quarterly. The Board of Control was given the authority to purchase land not exceeding 40 acres and to construct the necessary buildings and other improvements. That's a lot of money. And this was to schools that were then fed into the land-grant school, which at that time was Auburn and Alabama A&M. Okay, so this is your education part. That is, Smith-Lever says you have to have education. It's going to be the land-grant schools. Part of helping the land-grant schools was the Congressional District Ag Schools. Now, the next part deals with the dissemination part. That is, how are you going to get this information out into the communities, to the students who aren't attending the schools themselves. Now, even before the advent of land-grant colleges, the states were engaging the local population in the area of agriculture through farmers' institutes, and we see that term popping up here and there. These meetings grew out of the need for making farms more profitable and also for taking care of the natural resources, particularly land. Some of the early cases of the Farmer Institute concept were in the form of clubs and agricultural societies, mainly in New England, some as early as the late 1700s in Maine and Massachusetts. Through time, state departments or commissions of agriculture, as well as the agricultural experiment stations created by the Hatch Act of 1887, soon took over the role of organizing and supporting what were now formalized the Farmers Institute system, both financially and with instructors. By 1895, there was a formal organization of Farmer Institute workers, and each had a constitution. By 1905, 45 states had Farmer Institutes, accounting for over 10,000 half-day sessions that reached almost 1 million attendees. More specifically, the number of meetings varied by states, with, for example, New Mexico might have less than 10 farmer institutes in 1903, while New York had over 300. Topics depended on the state, which included crop production and diseases, animal husbandry, dairy, fruit trees, root crops, vegetables, soil chemistry, and so on. And while initially the farmer institutes were geared towards the male farmer, as time progressed, they eventually had institutes that focused on women's activities and also boys and girls institutes. Let's see. Let's go this. Now, midway through the first decade of the 20th century, a new idea in farmer education developed called movable schools. Now, sometimes we get this idea, we kind of mix up movable schools with the Jessup wagon. And this idea, this concept, was completely different than that. Movable schools were based on the need by farmers for a more thorough and advanced instruction that were given at the farmer institutes at the time. Farmer institutes might be a half a day, maybe 2 days, 3 days. They were considered, the movable schools were considered a short but systematic and detailed study of a particular subject in all its phases. How sometimes in the county high schools, movable schools came under the auspices of the agricultural college extension departments or even the farmer institutes themselves. But unlike the farmer institutes, they focused mainly on one topic, and they would last from 1 to 4 weeks as opposed to days. And some even required a small fee to participate. By 1908, USDA had an agricultural experiment station circular on the form and organization of movable schools in agriculture. And by 1911, 15 states had carried out activities under this rubric. So a movable school basically was that the land-grant school would take a department or a group of professors and send them to a community for up to a month, sometimes in the summertime, and then they would just have an intensive school. That is, they moved the school there. So this sort of is, again, we're making this connection between, all right, we have the school, and now we have some mechanism by taking some of the knowledge of the schools to the people, whether it's through farmer institutes or movable schools. Now, many have correctly stated that while farmer institutes and movable schools took the college to the people, it was only for a short period of time and limited to those who could get to the venues for instruction. From here, a more permanent mode of instruction is credited to the work of Seaman Knapp, we will come up with him later, who is known as the father of cooperative extension. For Knapp's contribution, 2 dates are important. First, on February 26, 1903, he established the first formal farm demonstration on a 70-acre plot in Walter Porter's farm in Terrell, Texas. Initially created to look at new production methods where area farmers could come and compare their traditional practices, the demonstration took on an official status when in part with aid from a $250,000 USDA grant looking at boll weevil eradication. For Knapp, on-farm demonstration was not only the key to agricultural development, but for social uplift as well. He says, quote, "The farmers' cooperative demonstration work may be regarded as a method of increasing farm crops and is logically the first step toward a true uplift, or it may be considered a system of rural education for boys and adults by which a readjustment of country life can be effected and placed upon a higher plane of profit, comfort, influence, and power." Okay, so this idea now of farm demonstration is something that's going to be going on year-round. He further goes on to say, "This body of knowledge cannot be conveyed and delivered by a written message to the people in such a way that they will accept and adopt it. This can only be done by personal appeal and ocular demonstrations. This is the mission of the Farmers' Cooperative Demonstration Work, and it has justified its claims by its results." So he's saying that for agricultural development and community development to take place successfully, you can't just hand out pieces of paper or just have instruction in the classroom. but that is people have to go and see for themselves what's going on, not just in a specific period of time, but throughout the year. Now, the second important date is November 12th, 1906. And we should all know that day, right? Because it's carved in stone over by the Chandler's Children's House. There's a monument there with that date. On this date, 2 farm demonstration agents were appointed. William Crider Stallings for Smith County, Texas, and Thomas Monroe Campbell for Macon and surrounding counties in Alabama. Now, John B. Pierce, who served Gloucester County, Virginia, followed December 14th, 1906. The key to these appointments is that as agents, Stallings, Campbell, and then Pierce were a permanent presence in the local community for demonstration purposes. Okay? However, and this is the point that we always have to make here at Tuskegee, while Stallings' appointment was based on his abilities as a progressive farmer, particularly for corn and swine, both Campbell and Pierce represented a partnership with the land-grant institution, Tuskegee and Hampton, and the USDA. That is the true partnership that would be the Smith-Lever Cooperative Extension Partnership. So while Stallings was a demonstration agent, he was a private citizen working for USDA, whereas Campbell and Pierce were part of the partnership. Got to keep up with these. Now, this is interesting. Porter is the person on your right, and he's given credit for the demonstration. The person on the left is the sharecropper who actually did the demonstration. So it's not the McQuinney demonstration, but it's the Porter demonstration. And then T.M. Campbell, Stallings, and Pierce. All right, so we could say then, I could stop right now and say that's the beginning of cooperative extension. And, we could say that that's the Tuskegee perspective, that Campbell is the first cooperative extension agent, not the first black extension agent, but the first agent. And though I did read an obituary for the daughter of Pierce, and in her obituary it says that her father was the first extension agent in the United States. So the folks at Hampton are really pushing on their side too. But that could be the gospel, I guess, of the birth of extension is 1906. But now we get to what I think is the story. If that's the story behind the story, then this is the story behind the story behind the story. So if you're getting graded for this, you could pass with what I've given already, if you went around on that. Okay. So what I want to say is that there's the Washington model, and that Washington really started cooperative extension before 1906. When Booker T. Washington first arrived in 1881, he spent his first months traveling throughout the rural counties to see the living conditions of the people he would be serving. As he recounted later, quote, "I confess that what I saw during my first month of travel and investigation left me with a very heavy heart. The work to be done to lift these people up seemed almost beyond accomplishing." Now, Washington's overall impression was that agriculture was the key because so many depended upon it for a living. He needed, as he said, to show the people how to put new energy and new ideas into farming, as well as into the intellectual and moral and religious life of the people. And that sounds kind of familiar. He's saying in the 1880s what Seaman Knapp said in 1903, that agriculture is important not just in terms of an occupation, but also in terms of community development. Now, to address these issues, Washington initiated monthly meetings for farmers that later evolved in 1892 into the annual Tuskegee Negro Conference, which we'll be celebrating starting tomorrow, the 123rd. According to Washington, the purpose of the conference was to bring together for a quiet conference not the politicians, but the representatives of the common, hardworking farmers and mechanics, the bone and sinew of the Negro race, and its ministers and teachers. Two objectives shall be kept in view. First, to find out from the people themselves the facts as to their conditions and to get their ideas as to the remedies for their present evils. Second, to get information as to how the young men and women now being educated can best use their education in helping the masses. Okay? So again, what he's looking at is that not only is he going to be educating people at his school, but he's going to try to find a way that once they're educated, they can take this education off the campus. Okay? It's not just education for education's sake. And it sounds a lot like extension, right? Let's see what's this. Just throw that up there. The format for the conference was informal and without any constitution or cumbersome rules. As Washington commented, the only constitution is common sense. He goes on to say, I became impressed with the idea that a great deal of good might be accomplished by some movement which would interest the older people and inspire them to work for their own elevation. I think that what brought this to my mind was my repeatedly noticing the unusual amount of common sense displayed by what is termed the ignorant colored man of the South. In my opinion, the uneducated black man in the South, especially one living in the country districts, has more natural sense than the uneducated ignorant class of almost any other race. Now, according to Thatcher, the only formal feature of the Negro Conference was the adoption each year of a series of declarations setting forth the purposes and sentiment of the gathering. Over the years, the common themes appeared in the declarations and included buying land, raising your own food, building better houses, extending the school year, that is, the school year in the counties, paying attention to the character of your leaders, that is, educational, political, and religious, and developing your own moral character. These declarations were then plainly printed at the Institute's printing office before the conference adjourned, and copies were given to all the delegates to take home, with the injunction that if they cannot read them, that they were to find someone to read them to them. On the backside of the same sheet was printed suggestions that during the coming year, the people should get give one or more talks about this conference in their communities and not keep these matters to themselves. That is, you've been here, go out and then sort of spread the gospel. And some of the topics they suggested were how to raise pigs. Now, one thing you'll find out about Booker T. Washington is he liked pigs. I mean, if you didn't have a pig, then you needed to get a pig. What crops pay best? How to raise poultry? How to plant a garden? How to begin buying a home? The value of a diversified crop? How the wife can assist the husband? How the husband can assist the wife? The right kind of minister and teacher? How to make the house and yard beautiful? How to live at home instead of out of the can? The importance of keeping children busy in school and out of school. So again, he's looking at this idea of self-sufficiency, character building, staying out of trouble. Now, Washington recognized early on the importance of the Negro Conference in terms of outreach to those who could not formally attend his institute. That is, if you're not going to be here for school, then at least you can come here and get a bit of education. As he says, the Tuskegee Negro Conference gives an annual opportunity for 600 or 800 Negro farmers to attend college for one day and fill themselves with hope, plans, and inspiration. Now, if he only had 600 or 800 people, that was not a well-attended conference. He usually had between 1,500 and 2,000. He also understood that for every attendee of the conference, there were thousands, that this was only a small portion compared to those who could not attend. Therefore, to further the impact of the conference, Washington encouraged the creation of local conferences at the county or community level. The formal application of this idea was first proposed at the third Tuskegee Negro Conference, which created what really is now kind of what I would consider the official link to extension. That is, that knowledge as defined by the Smith-Lever Act, the establishment of conferences similar in name to this one, that is the one on campus, held in every community where practical. By 1906, this strategy was firmly enforced when he said, "We urge that more and more energy be put into the annual Tuskegee Negro Conference, the great school of the masses, and that we go home from these annual gatherings and organize in every community a local conference that shall serve to keep alive and constantly emphasize the great doctrine of home-getting and character building, the foundations upon which the annual conference is built." So now he's not only saying, for those of you who come here, go back and spread the word. He's saying, for those of you who come here, go back and do something like here in your community, that is having these local conferences. Representatives then, okay, so once they've created these local conferences, representatives of the local conferences would then attend the annual conference on campus. These representatives would then report to the other state representatives as well as attendees from other states in the region and receive comments and feedback. So again, this is kind of this back and forth between the Tuskegee campus and then people who attended the annual conference. In this regard, it was his habit to close the conference with a call to those to not just take back what they learned and keep it to themselves, but to go back and spread the word. Excuse me. So in 1897, Washington says, "I hope that each one has come to get something to carry back with him. The conference will not amount to much if you simply consider yourselves alone. You must carry into your own community and help get you here." In 1899, he says, "Get all the inspiration you can here. Take it back home with you and talk about it all year. And we will put in motion an enthusiasm that will extend throughout the whole South." And then finally, in 1900, "The thing for us to do is to take home and put in practice what we get here." Okay, so that's a good story. But there's one last piece that I think cements Booker T. Washington and Extension. In an effort to coordinate the activities of these local conferences, the position of conference agent was proposed at the 4th Annual Negro Conference in 1895. That is, it called for the appointment of an education missionary who should visit every portion of the state in the interest of the masses of the people. This education missionary became the Tuskegee Negro Conference agent. Now, the duties of this agent were described at the 50th anniversary of Tuskegee as someone directly connected with the farmers, their way of living, and the necessity of keeping their schools and grounds clean. They told just how to care for their houses, schoolhouses, and premises. Of this conference work, more attention was given to farming than anything else. So again, this person is looking at all the things that happen at Tuskegee, taking it to these communities, looking at the community conferences, and seeing that these things are followed. Now, the first conference agent was Thomas J. Jackson. He was agent from 1897 to 1901. He was a graduate of Fisk University and later a math instructor at Tuskegee. In 1900, at the 9th conference, in the 3rd year of his appointment, this is what was reported as his annual work. He visited 45 of the 66 counties of Alabama in the interest of the conference today. He has also visited many other states and by meetings and literature has given help to those interested in organizing local conferences all over the South. He reports 150 local conferences organized during the year and has a record of over 250 conferences in all. Most of them meet regularly once a month. These local conferences are very much like the Farmer Institutes of the North. Among the subjects they discuss are that list that we read before about what crops pay best, the value of diversity of crops, pigs, gardens, how to treat your wife and husband better, and so on. Out of these conferences, in many instances, have grown county fairs in which both white and colored have exhibited products of the field and articles from the shop and home. The next year, it was reported that he visited 45 counties, helped to organize over 100 conferences, and over 250 are now known in existence. So this person is going throughout the state. He's visiting every county. He's setting up local conferences. These conferences are meeting once a month to extend the Tuskegee principle. Now, I was just reading recently, he wanted to retire from that position in 1900, but was persuaded by Washington to go one more year, and the newspaper said, "We are grateful that he has done this." But after serving 4 years as conference agent, Washington requested that Jackson take on the duties of secretary and field agent of the Negro Department of the South Carolina Interstate and West India Exposition to be held in Charleston, South Carolina. After that, he became a successful businessman in Anniston, Alabama, president of the local chapter of the Booker T. Washington's Negro Business League, and then he assisted subsequent conference agents with very enthusiastic farmer gatherings. So he was quite a person. He was the first and really established a very high bar. After Jackson's initial service, 4 other men were tapped by Washington to serve as conference agents. Considered as some of the best men of the institution, their duties incorporated the activities of the local annual of the Tuskegee Annual Conference and put it to the local level. And just to go, okay, this is the picture of the first conferences on campus. And remember, this is having 2,000 people, horses and buggies and walking. And these are 3 that I have pictures of. The second conference agent is Isaac Fisher. Now, he was conference agent for 2 years. He then left Tuskegee to become president of the branch state normal school at Pine Bluff, which is now University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. While there, he won nearly 30 national essay contests. In 1911, he was principal of another school in Louisiana. In 1914, he became the first editor of the Tuskegee-based journal, The Negro Farmer. About 1916, he became editor of the Fisk University News and taught journalism and debating at Fisk. And he subsequently became secretary of the Hampton Institute YMCA. He taught at Hampton. And Booker T. Washington frequently pointed to Fisher as one of Tuskegee's outstanding graduates. The letter of recommendation that Washington sent to the school in Arkansas where he was applying for the presidency, saying how he thought he was an excellent student and that if he didn't know what needed to be done, that he would figure it out within the first couple of months. And I have a feeling that Washington saw a little bit of himself in Fisher, that this was somebody that was like me and was going to give him a boost. The third conference agent was William John Henry Bohr. He was, again, about 3 years as conference agent. When he leaves, he departs to go to medical school. He gets his degree at Shaw University, and then later is recognized as the only doctor of his race in New Hampshire. It's like, okay. The fourth is Clinton J. Calloway, a very well-known person here on campus. After he spends a year as conference agent, he becomes director of the Tuskegee Extension Department in 1905, a position he held for more than 25 years. Under Calloway's direction, the Jessup Wagon was created, and he was also a leader with the Moveable School program at Tuskegee. So Calloway's a well-known person. And then finally, I don't have the first and last people's picture, is William Marcus Rakestraw. He was the conference agent from 1905 to 1919. And if you go through, T.M. Campbell becomes demonstration agent in 1906, and Rakestraw starts in 1905. Campbell becomes the USDA extension person in 1914. Rakestraw is still a Tuskegee extension agent until 1919. He is the longest serving conference agent. He leaves in 1919 to become president of Lomax Hannon College in Greenville, Alabama, whose buildings had been used for local farmers' conferences. Now, what Washington's model of local conferences and even monthly Farmers Institute, which he started in 1898, what makes them different from the traditional farmer institutes is, one, they were locally organized, often with the assistance of the conference agent. Two, they were on a monthly schedule. Three, they were assisted by the conference agent. And four, they received no support from the state. That's really important. That is, while these other farmer institutes are getting money from both the state and federal government, the Tuskegee Farmers Conference and the local farmers conferences are getting nothing from the state. Now, just as a snapshot comparison, in 1899, the state of Alabama, through the experiment station at Auburn, supported 21 farmer institutes visiting 21 counties. And remember, that same year, Thomas Jackson visited 45 counties, reported 150 local conferences, and 250 overall, most of them on a monthly basis. So, go Tuskegee. And just some delegates. A lot of people don't know where these conferences are being held. The first few were at Porter Hall. At the top was an auditorium. When that became too small, they met in the pavilion for 2 years. And as I think Washington, thank goodness, through some generous donors, they were able to build a chapel that was used to hold the conferences till the 1930s, when it was transferred to Logan Hall. I'm sorry I missed the presentation last week on the Jessup wagon, and so I don't mean to go over too much. I won't do that. That was brought up, but in 1896, Carver arrived at Tuskegee to head the School of Agriculture, and he carried Washington's practice of visiting rural places with a buggy, horse and buggy loaded with tools and materials, and he would go out on weekends to visit farms. This activity was formalized when Washington gained political support in 1897 from the Alabama State Legislature to establish the Tuskegee Agricultural Experiment Station, which included a four-wheel coach or carryall loaded with tools and seed packets from the Secretary of Agriculture and some demonstration plants. Washington then instructed a committee led by Carver to design a wagon that would carry equipment and perform demonstrations in the fields of farmers. Washington took Carver's plans to Morris Jessup, a benefactor of the school, who supplied the financial support in constructing the wagon, purchasing the mules and materials for harnesses, and so on. It was a total of $674.50 constructed by the students at Tuskegee. The newly named Jessup Agricultural Wagon left the Tuskegee campus May 24th, 1906, under the direction of George Bridgeforth, who was heading the agricultural department. In November 1906, the supervision was transferred to Tom Campbell. Now, termed by Booker T. Washington as the Farmers' College on Wheels, the Jessup wagon would first visit a farmer's field to demonstrate modern plowing practices or innovations in animal husbandry, or plant varieties, fertilizer applications, and soil testing. Instruction in raising poultry, cooking, preserving and canning, home maintenance, and health were then offered to the women of the household. After visiting area farms, the wagon would then proceed to a central community location for questions and answers from men and women, young and old. Local sentiment for the Jessup wagon was enthusiastic, and over the first summer of operation, its programs reached an average of 2,000 people per month. White plantation owners also requested visits from the Jessup wagon for instruction for their tenants to improve their farming methods. This model soon evolved from the Jessup wagon in 1906 to the Knapp agricultural truck from 1918 to 1923, and then to the Booker T. Washington Agricultural School on Wheels, 1923 to 1944. At that time, it was deemed not necessary because there were official federal extension agents in all the counties. Okay, summing up. Federal support of the farm demonstration program after the original 1903 Texas demonstration was to combat the boll weevil. By 1905, the General Education Board, a philanthropic organization funded mainly by John D. Rockefeller, was implementing the USDA farm demonstration areas not affected by the boll weevil. Through connections between Tuskegee and the General Education Board, Seaman Knapp became aware of Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver and asked Washington to recommend a Tuskegee graduate who, quote, is well posted in agriculture, knows how to mix with men, is a good practical farmer, and can make a good talk on agriculture. Knapp came down to Tuskegee in 1906 and proposed that one black man be placed on the farm demonstration staff, and that in addition, they would use Tuskegee's Jessup wagon to reach each month about 150 demonstration farm plots. T.M. Campbell became that demonstration agent in November 1906. Washington tried to get Knapp to expand the area of black demonstration agents to include Mound Bayou, a personal favorite of his, and into Texas. But Knapp replied, in fact, Mr. Washington, I'm trying to manage this colored work in the Gulf states as an extension of Tuskegee work. From my knowledge of conditions, I think it will be better to keep it as an attachment and extension of your work than to consider it as something inaugurated by the USDA. So what Knapp is doing is he's heard about Booker T. Washington. He's using Washington's methods and basically saying anything that deals with black farmers is really Tuskegee's work and not USDA's. So, in conclusion, cooperative extension, as we know it, was created by the Smith-Lever Act of 1914. The question then is one of where did it come from? Many have argued that extension in some form occurred whenever the need arose. That is, a necessity is the mother of invention perspective. Others would argue that it was a logical outgrowth of a series of incremental steps, from clubs to institutes to movable schools. That is, an evolutionary approach. However, I would argue that cooperative extension in the true sense of the word, that is, of a partnership between a land-grant institution and the creation of a method of outreach, that is, taking what the institution has to the people, was already in place at Booker T. Washington School at Tuskegee. Due to a vision to uplift his people, and through an educational and outreach mechanism of the annual Tuskegee Negro Conference and the conference agent that followed in its various forms, including the School on Wheels. Contemporaneously, there was the farm demonstration work of Seaman Knapp. The major difference is that Knapp had the benefit of support from USDA, whereas Washington had to go the route of private philanthropic organizations like the General Education Fund. In fact, as different agencies and organizations improved their outreach, the U.S. government seemed more inclined to co-opt it or take it over, though they seemed disinclined when targeting largely African American educational institutions, outreach, and communities. Together, however, when Washington and Knapp met in 1906, the movement for a national cooperative extension service would be pushed well on its way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zabawa. We have a few more minutes that we could take some questions maybe. Do we have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm a little confused, but from your research, are you saying that the cooperative extension was first begun at Tuskegee?
Yes.
Or are you saying that that the government or somebody else had?
The first, I guess, in terms of name, the first formal system was created by the government in 1914. People look at the direct precursor to that as the demonstration agents in 1906. And I'm saying that it goes back even further to 1897, 1898 with the conference agent. That is, Washington had a mechanism. If the idea is to have a partnership and to take the learning of the land grant into the community, he did that in two steps. One was to have the conference on campus. The second step was to then have local conferences based on the conference on campus. And then the third step was to have a person in charge that would visit all of those conferences, which I would consider to be an extension agent.
Then one other question I had, how did Auburn then get to be the extension place? If Tuskegee did.
Well, I mean, if you wanted to be nice, you'd say they were first, because they were created, that system was created in 1862. And then no formal mechanism of funding went to the 1890s. I mean, technically, they were supposed to get federal funding in 1890, but that didn't really come until much later. So that's why. And then, again, technically, the federal 1890 in Alabama is Alabama A&M. It took up its duties in 1891. Yeah.
Well, the reason that Auburn was named was, as I understand it, they were Alabama's land grant college, and Tuskegee University was the institute at the time, was a private institution.
Well, actually, at its creation, Tuskegee was a public institution. It was supported by the governor. He got a grant. And it even got a land grant from the state. But in 1890-something, Washington went to the state and asked to become independent because he felt that he could get more money from private donors if it were considered separate from the state than if it was still part of the state system. And that's where that separation takes place. At the same time, Hampton, for example, Hampton University, which is a private institution, was the 1890 land grant for Virginia. And then that land grant status was switched over to Virginia State. So, then I guess you could also say that Cornell University is a private university, but it's the land grant school of New York, because the land grant part of the university is considered a public part. So they managed to do an interesting tightrope walk there. So there's a private part Cornell, and then there's a public part Cornell, and the public part has the land grant.
So is Auburn the only land grant? Auburn and Alabama A&M are the two land grant schools?
The official legislation now in Washington is 1890 institutions, or 1890 universities, and Tuskegee University. So by that and, Tuskegee is part of the system.
But we only receive 10% funding, right?
Well,
Supposedly.
and our state funding is by special grants. Interestingly, West Virginia had an 1890 school, West Virginia State College. In the 1950s, during desegregation and the fight, West Virginia withdrew its land-grant status for West Virginia State. So from the 1950s until about 7 or 8 years ago, there was no 1890. About 7 or 8 years ago, they reapplied to have their 1890 status reinstated, and it was granted. So now West Virginia also has, and then even more interesting, last year, Central State University in Ohio was granted 1890 land grant status. So there's a new 1890 in Ohio. Interesting. It was put into the system last year, and this is the first year of federal funding for them. So, which was, I'm not quite sure how they managed that, because the intent of the 1890 schools was that it was going to be in areas that discriminated against students attending the 1862s. And I think Ohio did that. Maybe they did, just didn't tell anyone.
Nothing further. We appreciate you again. Got a little something for you, a little swag.
The check? Full of money. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and our next program will be next Tuesday, and it will be David Banks' Songs of the Underground Railroad, Codes, Meanings, and Stories. And it sounds like it's going to be a really interesting program, so please come be with us.
Is he going to be here?
It's going to be right here. All programs are here. Thank you, except for the last one. Have a nice day.
Thanks.